WNYC Studios.
Note to Self is supported by Squarespace, launching their new campaign, Make Your Next Move. Make your next move and set new goals this year. Lock down your next move idea with a unique domain and create a website to launch today. Use offer code NOTE for 10% off your first purchase of a Squarespace domain or website. Make your next move with Squarespace. More at squarespace.com. Note to Self is supported by nonprofit Mozilla, dedicated to an internet that works for all the people. Mozilla is a proud supporter of Note to Self's privacy paradox and the fascinating look at technology, humanity, and the sometimes gray matters in between. Mozilla.org.
In a world where news of the human consequences of injustice, racism, xenophobia, guns, and greed are always only a click away, what is the morally appropriate posture for a person who is safe? Do we have a responsibility to stay informed, even if it makes us feel embittered and hopeless?
It's Note to Self, the tech show about being human. I'm Manoush Zomorodi. And that was Kim Brooks. Kim is a writer who got on my radar a couple months ago when I read this beautiful essay that she wrote for New York Magazine about creativity. I loved it so much that I actually looked her up and emailed her. I never do that. I never email people and gush. But I did, and she responded, and she said, you know what? I'm going to be in New York next week. Do you want to get coffee? She lives in Chicago. And I was like, yeah, let's go out for coffee. So we did, and we talked about stuff that was on our minds, stuff that was troubling us, stuff that we wanted to explore. So I asked Kim to think about writing something for Note to Self, and she did. The questions that Kim has been asking herself are ones that I know a lot of you are thinking about too. It's about information overload, something that we talk about a lot here, and compassion, but particularly in these times of racial tension and an intense news cycle.
We begin tonight with the growing outrage after a deadly police shooting, the images now seen by millions across this country.
Yet another day, yet another African-American shot, killed by police, appears to be completely innocent.
Opening fire in downtown Dallas during a rally against the fatal police shootings of black men in Louisiana and in Minnesota.
We have seen tragedies like this too many times.
How can we remain informed and engaged citizens in an era of constant breaking news and waterfalls of shocking tweets without getting desensitized or numb or exhausted and feeling anxious and just plain isolated? Like there's nothing we can do. Well, Kim has sort of found an answer, at least for her. Here she is with her essay, written for you. She calls it The Problem of Caring.
Once, it was several years ago now, I decided to turn my back on the world, not in an ascetic or monastic sort of way, but in a very deliberate way, one designed to protect myself. I was 28 at the time, married a few years, relatively aimless both geographically and professionally, wanting to find a way to support myself as a writer, but clueless about how to actually make this happen, when a few weeks into the year, I learned that I was pregnant. My hormones surged, my insides shrunk, the thought of everything made me nauseous. I grew despondent. Some might call this perinatal depression. I think spiritual cocooning sounds nicer. Day after day, winter to spring, I sat on our sofa with our two small dogs, watching the snow fall, balancing my laptop on my growing belly, nibbling my way through packages of saltine crackers, telling people I was writing, but not really writing at all. What I did instead was read, occasionally books, but usually just news of the world. Usually, then as now, that news was terrible. These were post-MySpace, pre-Facebook Twitter days, and it seems very odd to think about seeing the news delivered in an uncurated, mostly commentless way. There was still slant and spin, but the din of countless voices that accompanies our news now was largely absent. You picked your ideological flavor, and then you sat back and listened, and let it all pour over you.
General Ban Ki-moon says the international community cannot continue to ignore the suffering in the Sudanese region of Darfur.
The news has been dominated, of course, by one event, the mass shooting at an American university, the worst in
I read
US
as many details as the Times could supply. When Sudanese troops attacked refugees in Darfur, I looked at the pictures. When a mentally ill student slaughtered students on the campus of Virginia Tech, the school where my sister had been an undergraduate, I read the details and viewed the pictures. This was before the smartphone Instagram hashtag pipeline allowed for instant scene of the carnage imagery, the pictures that arrive on our browsers blurred with a warning that clicking is going to reveal something grisly or worse. All there was news. I look back on it now as my season of informed misery. According to my husband and to everyone else who knew me, I was nearly impossible to be around during this time, constantly angry, anxious, indignant, and morose. Interestingly, despite being highly informed, I didn't actually become a better person. I didn't try to help any of the people I read about. I didn't become a humanitarian or an environmental activist or even volunteer for any of Chicago's many worthy nonprofits. I knew there was so much more that I could be doing, not only in response to what I saw, but just as a way of not feeling like such a tremendous lump. There were leaves on the trees now, and the wind rustled them. The dogs wanted to go outside. There was a novel I realized I had to write. I stopped wallowing in the ceaseless stream of misery. I worked and I wrote and I became a mother. I was a content person on the north side of Chicago, inching into the periphery of success, with children who did cute things and a desire, something I hadn't always had, to keep moving forward. If I moved my head a little too far in this direction, there were flames in the distance, and too far in the other direction, I could see untold millions weeping. But as long as I kept my gaze forward and ignored whatever flared up in the corners of my eyes, I could see a relatively happy world. I didn't want to look at it any other way. This is one of the ugliest manifestations of my privilege that I can envision, the luxury of ignorance. The news, or the things that make the news, you might say, do not live outside my doorstep. I could choose not to look at them simply by virtue of who I am. And yet, it's also an unavoidable truth that I am a higher functioning person because of this willful ignorance. Isn't there a humanitarian or philosophical or ethical mandate to not just know, but be a part of your world? The truth is, I continue to look away regularly, and I know others who do the same. In a world where news of the human consequences of injustice, racism, xenophobia, guns, and greed are always only a click away, what is the morally appropriate posture for a person who is safe? Do we have a responsibility to stay informed, even if being informed makes us feel overwhelmed by the volume of bad news, even if it makes us feel embittered and hopeless? I didn't know the answer. Not long ago, for example, I emailed my editor some silly question about an upcoming obligation. "Hey, Dan," I began my inane query. "Happy Friday." He wrote back, "Only happy if you're not reading the news. Are you under a rock?" I wasn't, but I might as well have been. I was in the middle of one of my regular news fasts. For 5 days, I hadn't read a single report. And while I fasted, the rest of the country was reading about their fellow citizens shot and killed at traffic stops, arrested at peaceful protests, murdered by snipers. And while all this was going on, while most people were posting their expressions of outrage and sympathy, their thoughts and prayers, I was plowing through work, taking my kids to the pool, trying out a new recipe for green gazpacho. If I had been reading, I would have been waving my fists and cowering under a chair like everyone else, but I wasn't, and so I wasn't. Did this make me a worse person? Instead of spending 3 hours ingesting information online, I spent 10 minutes reading the essential facts, and then I called a friend I hadn't talked to in a few months, a friend who never fails to be not just informed, but also insightful and compassionate and intellectually brave. How about them Yankees? How about them Yankees? I started the conversation. She laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that is pretty damn close to a sob, because in addition to being a friend and a teacher and an acclaimed poet, she's also an African American, and now worries every time her mom gets in the car that hers could be the next broken taillight that catches the attention of a twitchy police officer.
There were two right on top of each other. Yeah, thanks.
My name is Kiki Petrosino. I'm an associate professor of English at the University of Louisville in Louisville, Kentucky. I'm a woman of color. My mom is African American. My dad is Italian American.
We also both had very interesting hair, I think. And we were drawn to each other, I think, for that reason as well.
As Kim said, I have like some voluminous curly hair, so I probably present to people as a light-skinned Black woman, I think, right? Completely apart from that is just a fear that I've always had of driving. I can drive, but it makes me nervous. And now with all the news, I know we definitely talked in our conversation about how it is not helping my driving anxiety to know that if I were pulled over, I fear, you know, I have a fear now. I have a fear that I wouldn't know how to handle the situation, or that I could lose control of the situation maybe, or that family members who are driving could be pulled over or stopped at any time. One fear I have is not being able to pull my phone out quick enough to like film whatever is happening. You know, it seems to take forever for these programs to boot up on the phone. And I now know that I must record, you know, I must find a way to record. So you just go down these rabbit holes of fear, and that's really not good, you know?
As we talked about what was happening to our country, I wondered if the sharing of stories and honest dialogue and saying the hard thing, not just on Facebook, but to actual human beings, is one of the few things that makes it possible to confront such awful news.
We feel, on the one hand, we're brought really front and center because you can literally watch, at this point, video footage of someone dying, which is probably the most intimate moment, you know, of a life. But we don't know that person. We can't touch them. We can't talk to their family. It really throws into question what a community is and how to participate in community, given all of these technological advancements that we're making.
I wondered if talking and listening can be an antidote to fear.
It's so good to hear.